This story should send chills down everyone's spine, right or left, libertarian or liberal, whoever, whatever side of the political aisle you're on. If you're an American and you believe in our Constitution, this should scare everyone. For those of you who continue to maintain that Trump is not an authoritarian leader and this is not an authoritarian administration, please listen to this with an objective, open mind. If you're sucked in by the cult and everything he does is good, then I don't know if you'll be able to hear this. But for everyone else who has an objective and open mind and is not completely biased and sold out to the cult, I think you'll get this. I'm going to tell you what Homeland Security wants to do. It's very chilling. They want social media sites to expose anti-ICE accounts. So anyone who has gone on social media and said anything negative about ICE is at risk here of having their names, addresses, whatever, credit card numbers, whatever, turned over to the government by social media sites like Facebook and Google. This is chilling. This is really, really chilling. This isn't, oh, this might happen someday, or if we keep going down this path, that's eventually going to happen. It's happening now. It's happening right now. The New York Times reports that the Homeland Security Department has sent Google, Meta, and other companies hundreds of subpoenas for information on accounts that track or comment on immigration and customs enforcement officials and tech workers said. Now, listen to this. I'm going to read some of this article. Then I want to compare this to what scholars of authoritarianism say are some of the hallmark signs, some of the telltales of authoritarianism and of authoritarian regimes taking root and taking power, where you can look at this and say, does this fit in to what scholars who've studied the history of authoritarian regimes, especially in the last 100 years, so in other words, in modern history, in modern times, does this fit in to what they see as, where we can legitimately say this is an authoritarian regime? All right, let's look at what they're trying to do. The Department of Homeland Security is expanding its efforts to identify Americans who oppose immigration and customs enforcement by sending tech companies legal requests for the names, get this, the names, email addresses, telephone numbers, and other identifying information behind social media accounts that track or criticize the agency. So if you've gone on Facebook and you say you don't want to use your real name, and you've been critical of ICE, this means you. They go on, they look up your name, they find out that's not a real person's name, and they send a subpoena to Facebook and say, give us all the information on this guy. He said bad things about us and he hurt our feelings. And in their mind, that's a crime. But it's not. In recent months, Google, Reddit, Discord, and Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, have received hundreds of, get this, administrative subpoenas, we'll talk about that in a minute, from the Department of Homeland Security, according to 4 government officials and tech employees privy to the request. Google, Meta, and Reddit complied with some of the requests, the government officials said. In the subpoenas, the department asked the companies for identifying details of accounts that don't have a real person's name attached and that have criticized ICE or pointed to the locations of ICE agents. The New York Times saw 2 subpoenas that were sent to Meta over the last 6 months. Okay, so they verified that they've seen some of these, at least 2 of them. Now, if you're in the Trump, if you're on the Trump bandwagon and you hear this, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, if they are pointing to the locations of ICE agents, you're thinking, well, that's putting ICE agents at risk, putting them in danger, and that's a crime. They're not allowed to do that. Okay, let's address that because first of all, it's not a crime. I don't know if you remember the company called Waze, W-A-Z-E. They had a map program, a GPS program. I think before Google did, even before Google Maps came along. Anyway, Google ended up buying them about 10 years ago, I think. And they, one of their defining features was the ability for drivers to put a pin on the map of where they were and say, I just spotted a police car here. So then when other drivers went by that area, they would see that pin that somebody had reported a police car was there. Well, they got sued, and the police agencies were screaming up and down, saying, "You're putting our officers at risk. You have to stop. That's against the law. That can't be legal." They were trying to get them to stop. No court ever ruled for the police departments. In other words, they were unsuccessful in all their legal efforts to get Waze to stop. And Waze continued to do it till Google bought them. And now Google has incorporated that into their Maps program. And get this, there is not any evidence that a single time someone who uh, found out about the location of a police officer through any of these Maps programs, there is no indication that any police officer was ever attacked by a person who found their location because of these programs. And in fact, Waze used to claim that it actually makes drivers slow down because they see a cop is up ahead. And I believe that's probably true. They see the pin on the map. I mean, that's how I used to drive. I would see the pin, I'd be like, oh, okay, slow down, slow down. Make sure you're not going more than 10 miles an hour over the limit. And yeah, so, it often has the opposite effect. Now, you may say, well, these people that are doing this, reporting ICE, people aren't going to slow down because they saw the report. They're going to avoid the area. Yes, that's right. Anyone who thinks they might be at risk, a lot of people who are U.S. citizens are at risk because they are picking up U.S. citizens. They are killing U.S. citizens. They're killing U.S. born U.S. citizens. So pretty much everybody's at risk. And why wouldn't you want to be alerted that they're, on a certain corner or a block and you go a different way? That's legal. That's legal. You may not like it, but it's perfectly legal. Okay. All of this is legal. And that's why no court was ever able to rule against Waze. That's why they weren't able to stop Waze. All right. All right. Now, to continue on, some of the internet companies that were notified, that received subpoenas, notified the people whom the government had requested data on and gave them 10 to 14 days to fight the subpoena in court. Okay, on the one hand, that's good, but on the other hand, it puts the onus on the person who's been targeted by the government. They have to pay money to get a lawyer to fight this in court, and that can be very, very expensive, and most people can't afford that. All right. Let's see here. The government is taking more liberties than they used to, said Steve Loney, a senior supervising attorney for the ACLU of Pennsylvania. It's a whole other level of frequency and lack of accountability. Over the last 6 months, Mr. Loney has represented people whose social media account information was sought by the Department of Homeland Security. The department said it had broad administrative subpoena authority. I said I wanted to talk about that, and we'll do that now, but did not address questions about its request. In court, its lawyers have argued that they are seeking information to help keep ICE agents in the field safe. Okay, so the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, is claiming broad administrative subpoena authority. In other words, they are not going outside the agency. They're not going externally to a judge in a court that is not attached to the agency. They are allowing the agency to rule that it itself has the ability to issue these subpoenas. So, in other words, it's like, hey, we need to get a subpoena. Okay, we'll give you one. The agency that wants the subpoena is the agency giving out the subpoenas. You see what I mean? It's not right. It's not right. This is unconstitutional, violates the Fourth Amendment, violates all kinds of protections we have built into our system. And anyone who loves the Constitution, this is one of the things we love because it protects us from this kind of government overreach, and overreach in a very dangerous way. These people, when they overreach, they are putting people in jail, people who are innocent, and they're even killing people. They're killing people in the jails too, not just on the streets. All right. So Meta, Reddit, and Discord declined to comment. But a Google spokesperson said, when we receive a subpoena, our review process is designed to protect user privacy while meeting our legal obligations. We inform users when their accounts have been subpoenaed unless under legal order not to, or in an exceptional circumstance. We review every legal demand and push back against those that are overbroad. All right. The Trump administration has aggressively tried. Oh, sorry. There's one more thing I wanted to mention up here real quick. this sentence, I meant to say something about this. In court, its lawyers, DHS lawyers, have argued that they are seeking information to help keep ICE agents in the field safe. Keep that in mind. I'm going to come back and talk about that in a minute when we look at how scholars of authoritarian regimes look at authoritarian systems and the signs that you are in one. And this is a biggie. This is a biggie when the government is seeking to protect its own agents rather than protect the people that it is sworn to protect, meaning the people, we the people. All right. The Trump administration has aggressively tried tamping down criticism of ICE, partly by identifying Americans who have demonstrated against the agency, our legal right guaranteed by the Constitution. ICE agents told protesters in Minneapolis and Chicago that they were being recorded and identified with facial recognition technology. Last month, Tom Homan, the White House border czar, also said on Fox News that he was pushing to create a database of people who were arrested for interference, impeding, and assault. Okay? Now, I know if you're a Trump supporter, I was a conservative all my life. I know how you think because I used to think that way too. So the way we used to think and the way some of you still think, because you haven't updated yourselves yet, you need to update to the new current situation. All right? Stop following a cult leader. Seriously. Anyway, so Tom Holman said he's pushing to create a database of people who were arrested for interference, impeding, and assault. And, if you're MAGA, you're thinking, well, if they were arrested for interfering, impeding an investigation or law enforcement action or assaulting officers, they should be arrested for that. And I agree. Everybody agrees with that. But guess what? Like a lot of people in this whole Christian nationalist movement, especially so-called pastors behind it, like Doug Wilson, they use words that have a common understanding of what the definition is, but they've changed the definition ever so slightly to where it means something very different than what it normally means. And here's what they've done here. The word interference, for instance, they'll say, well, if someone's interfering with an investigation or law enforcement action or impeding it, they should be arrested or they should be pulled out of the action so they can no longer impede or interfere. And most of us would agree with that, except they've changed the definition of these words. Impeding used to mean that you literally were standing in such a way that you were physically preventing officers from doing their jobs. And officers might say, back up, you got to get back on the sidewalk or whatever. And if you refuse to do that, then they could arrest you. But here's what these people mean by this. Interference and impeding an investigation to them is people standing on the corner or standing on the sidewalk peacefully, quietly, not even moving physically, not blocking anybody, but they pull out their cell phones and they turn on the video and they start shooting video. To them, that's what they're calling interference and impeding. Because how many times have we heard cases that they've brought against people who were in protests or whatever, demonstrations, or just observing, and they've arrested people who were literally just observing from the sidewalk. And they told, when they got back to the agency, they told the agency, they said, no, that person was interfering with our action. They were interfering. They were impeding our progress. And then we see video of what happened, and no such thing happened. All right, the last part of this says, unlike arrest warrants, which require a judge's approval, administrative subpoenas are issued by the Department of Homeland Security. This is what we just talked about. They were only sparingly used in the past. This is how these types of subpoenas used to be used, primarily to uncover the people behind social media accounts engaged in serious crimes, such as child trafficking. Okay, so they'll get a subpoena, an administrative subpoena, because they got to do it really fast. They contact Facebook. They say, we need to know who this person is because we think he's in the midst of a child trafficking scheme and children are at risk right now. Meta would be like, okay, here's the information. All right. So that's what this used to be used for emergency situations like that. But last year, the department ramped up its use of subpoenas to unmask anonymous social media accounts, and not just social media accounts that are, alerting people as to the location of these law enforcement people, these ICE people and Border Patrol people, but also people who are just critical, who criticize. I'm criticizing them. They could do this to me, and they could do it to any of you. They could do it to any of us. Anybody who posts a negative comment on any online platform could be at risk for being targeted by the government. In September, for example, it sent Meta administrative subpoenas to identify the people behind Instagram accounts that posted about ICE raids in California, according to the ACLU. All right? So these people, they're really going after them. Now let's look at what scholars say and see what the indicators are. See if any of this is an indication of authoritarianism in our government. All right? So scholars don't define authoritarianism by one action, but they look at a whole pattern, a series of patterns. They look at a series of different types of actions and see if it forms a pattern that authoritarian regimes usually follow. And here's what we have. So the first one is targeting political dissent. And that is a core red flag of authoritarianism, of course. And that's exactly what this government is doing. Political dissent is people who criticize the government for doing what they're doing. That's dissent. And that's exactly who they're targeting. If you do that online, they might come after you. Weak judicial oversight. It removes accountability, and that's what they're doing with these administrative subpoenas. Instead of going to a real judge in a real court that is unaffiliated with the department, they are going to officials in the department itself saying the department wants to issue a subpoena, and this official says, okay, the department gives the department the right to have that subpoena. It's totally bogus, totally bogus. Weak judicial oversight, no judicial oversight. Mass surveillance of citizens chills free speech. Yeah, this is mass surveillance of citizens. They're going on and they're taking pictures at the protest, and they are doing facial recognition and finding out who they are. They go online, they see if they posted things. Anyway, the whole thing, when you read these stories, it makes you not want to say anything online. It makes me a little scared to do YouTube videos. I mean, look how public this is. You can see my face, for crying out loud. So yeah, they could find out who I am very easily. And look, I'm what you call I'm dissenting. I'm dissenting. This is political dissent. So all of us, everybody you see on YouTube who talks about this stuff and is critical, all of us are at risk in one form or another. All right. So it's not risk free. But you're also at risk if you just post a comment here and there online, a public comment. All right, another indicator is punishment for criticism, not crime. In other words, they're punishing people who are criticizing them rather than actual criminals. Man, if you don't see that this government is awash in that, that's an authoritarian hallmark, and this is all they're doing. It's all they're doing. I mean, this case against James Comey and Letitia James and all these people who were critics of Trump and went after him legally, as they were supposed to do. Uh, yeah, our government's spending all the time on these people and not real criminals. And that's political dissent, which is protected by the Constitution. All right, use of state power for regime protection rather than public safety, authoritarian hallmark. That's the one I mentioned before, where they go back and they say, well, yeah, we had to arrest these people because they were putting the officers in danger. So instead of protecting the public, they are protecting the regime, and they will go to these protests and they will shoot demonstrators who are peaceful and not attacking them in any way whatsoever and not doing anything violent. They just happen to take a disliking to them, so they shoot them because they're there to protect themselves, not to protect the public. All right, wake up, MAGA people. That's all I can say. Please wake up. Look, the political heritage that MAGA came from in the early 2000s, that was the Ron Paul era, and they were libertarians. The descendants of the libertarians of the early 2000s are now MAGA. All right, what did you guys fight about in the early 2000s when Bush was trying to pass the Patriot Act? You said, no, never give the government this much power to surveil citizens and to get information on citizens. because that'll come back to bite us. And guess what? You were right. And the ironic thing is, now that you've been proven right, you're on the side of the government doing what it's doing. You are on the side of the government having all this information and using it against citizens. My, how the tables have turned. You know, it's really crazy. You guys stood up and fought this when it was, you know, being passed in the early 2000s after 9/11. And now you're on the side of the government that is doing these things that back then you said, no, that would be horrible if the government did that. And you were right. It would be horrible. And it's happening now. And it's horrible. And you are the people who are now standing with it and saying, I'm okay with that. Wake up. Wake up. No, seriously. I come from that heritage. And I have enough consistency to say what I stood for back then. If I support this regime now, I'm going against what I believed then. And there's no reason to change what I believed then, because what I believed then was what is, you know, consistent with our laws and consistent with our Constitution. But these MAGA people, they're like, oh, yeah, Trump. We love Trump. We love Trump. Whatever he wants, he can have it. Stand up for the principles you once had. That's all I'm saying. Stand up for what you once used to believe. Stop surrendering all of that for this man in the White House. It's not worth it. He's destroying the country. He's destroying the Constitution, and you are letting him do it. You used to be the bulwark against this kind of thing, and now you're the gateway to it. All right, that's it. That's all I got. Actually, I have a lot more, but can't do it now because I could go on all day. Anyway, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And I will be back soon, hopefully. Take care.